Welcome back to the Solomon Plus podcast. My name is Josh Watford, and we have the man, the myth, the legend across from me.
The only one, John Nicholson.
That's it.
Not the only one. No, there are tons of John Nicholsons. It's such a common pairing of the Nicholson name. It's such a funny thing. But anyway.
That's kind of an aha moment for me whenever I first got on Facebook and searched all the other Josh Watfords out there, and there were even some in Alabama.
Really?
You know? Yeah. So
you're the only Watford I've ever met.
I befriended all of the other Josh Watfords.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case. We needed to rise up against the rest of you all. And
We've been warned.
They would make me the prince of Josh Watford.
That's so funny.
Yeah, okay, we're derailed quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a Roy Barnett moment. Like,
Thank you. Shout out to Roy.
If you'd ever been in a prayer meeting with Roy, you know what we're talking about.
There you go.
Anyways, today is not about Josh Watford or John Nicholson,
Nope.
but about
Malachi.
Malachi. You said it right.
I did. You tried to red pill me early with Malachi.
You
That's
got
one of the
Malachi,
jokes. That's right.
Habakkuk,
That's right.
Zechariah, just all of these.
How do you say these names?
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And the way we say them are not the way the original readers would have said it, but that's okay. That's
Right.
another topic for another day. But yeah, we are finally to Malachi.
Yeah.
When I say finally, it feels like we've sped through this.
Boy, it's been really amazing how quickly this has gone.
Yeah.
But boy, it has been so good. Again, I am grateful for engagement from everybody else that's been plugged into this. But man, for me, just the journey through it personally. I've engaged with the minor prophets, throughout my ministry career, but
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever engaged with them as a unit like this, and it's really been enlightening.
Yeah. All right, we're going to do a recap.
Yeah, but we can do some of that now.
Okay, just
Since it's on your mind.
Just one question: what has been your favorite to read? Just to sit down and read, not to preach, not to any of that, but like going through it again this time. What has been your favorite one to?
Well, that's a
just
tough question.
Read throughout the week.
Malachi's on my mind, and partly that's just because it's so fresh.
Yeah,
But there is a lot there. Probably Zechariah.
that was going to be my answer.
And it's because of all the forward-looking threads to Christ.
Yeah,
For me.
it's a fun book.
Yeah, well,
in my opinion.
Yeah, there's some.
That's one way that I would describe it.
Yeah.
There's many ways to describe it, but Zechariah is just a fun book. There's so much there to all these threads to pull together.
And then you got Jonah, and boy, there's. I haven't really
I
thought
know that-
about
I
what's
know
been
that's
my
like-
favorite one. That's good though. Yeah, that's a worthy thought.
It's kind of like asking which of your kids is your favorite. You could probably answer that even more easily than I'm just kidding.
Plead the fifth.
But we are to Malachi, and
Yeah.
it's okay if Malachi is your favorite because Malachi is one of the ones that you said from the very get-go. Like that's one of the
Yeah,
ones
it
I
was
want to
one I
preach. You called dibs on Malachi. And so I guess before we dive into all the technicals, talk about that. Talk about why, from the get-go, you're like, yes, I'm in with Malachi. I want to preach Malachi. What is it about Malachi that you feel like speaks to you and gives us a message as the church?
The thing that speaks to me is the conversation that's happening in Malachi. Mm-hmm. This is not just a one-way street. And I guess for me personally, this is something early in my Christian life I was very drawn to Jeremiah. He's one of my Old Testament heroes. He was an unwilling prophet. He really didn't want to be doing this, but he just was responding to God, fire in the bones kind of thing if I don't preach. But Jeremiah is really the first biblical character that it dawned on me, the light came on, that he's talking back to God.
Oh yeah.
He's arguing with God. He's contending with God over some things and not really happy about how some things are going and taking that to God. Mm-hmm. And the that, wow, we can do that. And I remember that being real early. I mean, in my teens, late teens, early 20s. Ancient days ago now. But
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, but I'll say it for you. But that's something that has, I guess, always engaged my imagination. And here in Malachi, we see that really laid out. We'll dive into this a little bit more as we move on here. But for me personally, it's that conversational, because Malachi is full of questions.
Yeah.
Questions from God to the people, and questions from people to God. And they are not softballs.
Oh no,
We're dealing with, and we get down into some nitty gritty, hard things to deal with from both sides of the fence.
Yeah, we were talking about before we hit record, just kind of the connections between Habakkuk and Malachi, because those are some hardball questions in Habakkuk as well.
Absolutely, they are.
But I think one of the differences is that in Habakkuk, it seems to be coming from him.
Yeah.
It is him as the prophet who is wrestling with God.
Right.
Here in Malachi, it may be a little bit of both, but it seems to be most clearly the people, or Malachi is speaking for the people. And so it's more of a communal type thing that's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah,
your
both
other
of them
question,
deal with hard questions.
Yeah. Your other question, what does this do for us, or what does it have to do with us as a church? I think one of the outstanding matters for me with Malachi, one of the reasons I wanted to preach this one, is because it does close the Old Testament canon for us as we have it. But I've always been struck by
That's something I want to talk about, by the way.
All right, well, you file that away.
Yeah.
But I've always been struck by the fact that when we turn the page from Malachi to Matthew, we are 400 years elapse.
Yeah.
Now, we have a lot of information in the Apocrypha with Maccabees and Esdras and so forth about the events that occur in that. But as far as another word from God, another prophet who arises, somebody else that has a direct, thus saith the Lord, it ain't there.
Yep.
The next word we have is John 1, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's that's God's next word to his people.
Yeah.
So for 400 years, what are they doing? And they're finding a way to be faithful because Jesus arrives and finds that there are faithful people.
Yeah.
There are some who are blinded, but somehow they have managed to keep this faith alive. And Jesus comes. And so I think it's a salient moment for us to soberly look at what's going on. And I think it's fascinating to think or to consider that the last thing that God is giving to us through the Old Testament is, let's have this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, so because it ends by saying, look, hey, y'all watch out for the prophet Elijah.
That's right.
And, when you look at the New Testament Gospels, people were doing that. Mm-hmm. People were looking for Elijah. That's one of the questions to John the Baptist. Hey, are you Elijah?
Right.
And even when Jesus died on the cross, some people were saying...
he's Elijah.
Yeah.
Or let's wait and see.
He's calling for Elijah.
Right.
And so the people took it to heart that what Malachi was saying would come true.
Right.
Even to today at Passover.
Yep. There
is a plate set out for Elijah.
That's right.
And so...
They leave the door open just in case he comes in.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that part. But yeah, so, they are still looking for this Elijah that Malachi talks about. And we're in Jesus' day. And, of course, Jesus says, yeah, John the Baptist was Elijah.
Yeah.
And you didn't listen to him. So, that mystery is solved in that. And so that just shows us right from the get-go that what Malachi has prophesied has come true.
Yeah, in many ways.
And we need to listen to Malachi because he's a true prophet. And, obviously he's in our canon.
Right.
But, it's different when we're looking at things, because we've been looking at things like in Zephaniah and even in Zechariah where we're saying, yeah, that's still future to us.
Right.
A lot of stuff that Malachi has talks about already came true with Jesus and John the Baptist. And so we can look at this and trust that all these other things that Malachi is talking about is true and is for us. And so, yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that. But so, John, go ahead and talk to us about Malachi. What are some things that we need to know about Malachi jumping into it? Because I don't know when this will be published. This podcast will be published. I don't know if it's before or after your sermon, and so you can go ahead and give us some points in your sermon about how do we make sense of this book.
Well, again, I think the heart and soul of it is this conversation that's occurring between the Lord and His people, and because it begins in verse 2 with God saying to His people, I have loved you, and the people's immediate response is, well, how have you loved us? And they begin to unpack this, and it moves through this whole series of interactions between God and His people. And again, sometimes it is God questioning the people about where they are with some things, about their holiness and their sanctification, and sometimes it's the people asking God, is it worth it to follow you? Because and they're just real questions that we dig into, and there's some some of the famous passages that are there out of Malachi in chapter 1. Verse 10, where God's talking to the priest, and he's saying, I just really would prefer that one of you would lock the doors and turn the lights off rather than come and offer pointless offerings to me. Don't go through the motions, come with your hearts, is what he says.
Yeah.
And then there's the big famous passage in chapter 3, verse 8, where talking about tithing, will a man rob God? But you have robbed me, God says. And the people say, well, how have we robbed you? And so it's, and this, it makes me think, Josh, when I read those sections where there's this back and forth between God and the people, I think of the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, on that day, many will say, Lord, Lord. And they'll say, well, when did we do this? Or didn't we do this? And there's this conversation that's going on, or even the part where in Matthew 25, where Jesus says, on that great day, the Lord will be sitting there and He'll divide the nations before Him like the sheep and the goats, and He'll say, to the sheep, you fed me when I was hungry. You gave me something to drink when I was thirsty. You clothed me when I was naked, so forth. And when did we see you? And He says, and so there's this conversation, and so it's reflective, I think, of what's going on here. This is helping us to see that this is this lifelong conversation that we get to have.
Well, there's a whole theological point here that we have a God who speaks.
Yes.
We do not have a God who is distant from us.
Yeah, and this is a conversation that we have had, just in interactions that we have with people in the wild, if you will, and even here at within the boundaries of what we do as a church, Sunday school, or other Bible studies. There's a real desire for an attraction for the sparkly, shiny thing, the esoteric knowledge, something that is, I've got something that nobody else has, and if you only knew this, then you would really get the whole picture.
Yeah,
that's not how God works. I mean, right here in Malachi, it's not that God is not saying, I've got something, and if only you could achieve level 42 and get the super secret sauce of whatever it is that you've got to have, then you would be on the end club. No, God says, look, I have loved you. I'm inviting you into this. I've got to ask you some hard questions about your life. It's not that God is hidden. He has revealed Himself. He's made Himself known. And, I think there is this is part of our fallen nature, I think, is this desire to have the unusual or the, I'm struggling to find my word there, but
just a crazy supernatural type experience.
That over-the-top kind of thing. And so often it's just in this ordinary, day-to-day, let's keep living our lives in faithfulness with God, that's where we do meet Him, and He shows up.
Yeah.
We've got some stories here recently of those kinds of things over a long track. I think of the opportunity that arose out of Michelle Krieger's testimony that she gave. It was a visiting family, one-time visitors, but in response to that, wanted to provide for the lady that Michelle had mentioned in her testimony, a washer. And some other folks in our congregation spoke up and said, we'll provide the dryer. And so they've got a new washer and dryer. And then to draw it full circle as we show up, it dawned on everybody, oh, this is the house, these are the folks that a group of our folks built a ramp for a year ago. Mm-hmm. And little did we know we were building a ramp so we could get a washer and dryer in their house, But, those are just kinds of things that, those are exciting. But we wouldn't have seen those if we were always out here looking for that next mountaintop thing. Building a ramp in July is not a lot of fun. It's hot and sweaty work. But that was part of what God was doing in that moment. And you just had to continue to be faithful in that over the long haul.
Yep.
And we wouldn't have seen God at work in that had we been constantly looking for the next worship high or the next, whatever it is that we're looking for. But again, to this issue of looking for the esoteric, because there are all kinds of merchants of of the fantastic and the supernatural and all this that are leading people astray.
Yep.
When God is saying, no, I have loved you. This is the basis of the conversation that we have.
Well, and you just notice the content of the things they're talking about. They're talking about their marriages.
Yeah.
Right? They're talking about their worship at church.
Yep.
They're talking about how they handle their money.
Yep.
Very
mundane.
Very mundane. I was going to say down in the dirt.
There
issues,
you go.
Right? It's not like, what did you do with the revelation I gave you of the seventh heaven? Right. It's what do you do on a daily basis, and those are the issues that God is confronting them about. How do you just live your life?
Yep.
And they were living their lives fairly poorly, it seems.
Right.
But this gives us insight into, well, God cares about even what may seem to us small things.
Right.
You know, how do I talk to my wife when I first wake up? God cares about that.
Oh, you had to bring that up. Thanks.
Well, that wasn't to you. That was to me. You know, how do I talk to my kids when I'm trying to get them in bed? You know, how does, you know, how do I handle my money and my finances?
Absolutely.
And all that kind of stuff? And so God cares about those things, and it's not that He's just left us there for us to figure it out. He's told us.
Yes.
What He desires of us.
And again, it's not some shiny, sparkly, some secret knowledge that you get and it boosts your spiritual. No, it is just right here, right now, taking out the garbage, feeding the dog, talking to your wife in the morning, kinds of things where we live our lives, and it's right there that God wants to live with us.
Yeah.
The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or as Eugene Peterson famously puts it, it moved into the neighborhood. He becomes our neighbor. He's living right here with us, experiencing the things that we are experiencing, walking with us through that. And this is exactly what's going on with Malachi. God's saying, I want to do this. Sometimes your actions are keeping you from being a part of this. And in fact, as he says there in chapter 1, verse 10, rather than you bringing these worthless offerings, I'd just rather you shut the doors and stay home, you know. Boy, that's convicting kind of stuff. But it matters how we come to worship. It matters how we approach God. It matters how our lives, what we do with our lives matters. Does it earn us salvation? No, but because of our salvation, it should have a transformative effect in our lives. And if it's not, maybe something's wrong. And that's what God's saying.
Talk to us for a second about the very first back and forth.
About the love and...
Yeah, I mean, what the very first thing God says to His people is what?
I have loved you.
I have loved you.
Yeah. And this is from the foundation of the world. I will never forget encountering that when I was reading through Revelation, and that that it was, man, before the foundation of the world, God was loving me. He knew me. You know, This is Him saying to Jeremiah, before you were born, while you were in the womb, I knew you.
Right.
You know, David in Psalm 139. You know, he formed me in my mother's womb. He knows how I'm made, and that God there's not ever been a moment that He hasn't loved us. Man, startling.
Yeah.
But then the people's response is, "Oh yeah, well how have you loved us?"
Challenging God's love, like.
I mean, gosh, come on, folks, really. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I'm there. There are days I think, you know, God, do you really love me? Yeah, He does.
Yeah.
And then he dives off into this, I've loved Esau, or I've loved you and I've hated Esau, or I've loved Jacob and hated Esau. What's that all about, Josh?
Well, you go back and listen to my Obadiah sermon.
That's right. There you go.
Go read Romans 9. And Paul handles all that. But yeah, just before he gets into all the other stuff, this is something that has to be settled first. Because I think their question, how have you loved us, is repeated in every single one of their other questions, right? And so going back to my kids, right? There are times where here is an example for you. Sorry to bore you with kid stories, but Josiah lost his sunglasses sometime over the summer. I think we accidentally lost him at the beach. We thought we brought him back and we couldn't find him. Anyways, he hasn't had his sunglasses that we bought him at the beginning of summer, all summer. Judah has had his. Well, we finally decided, look, JoJo needs to get some sunglasses. So, Mom sits down with JoJo. They get to pick out some sunglasses, and Judah finds out that that's what they're doing. Well, it is totally unfair. I mean, that's what he just said over and over again. And I'm like, buddy, do you understand that mommy and daddy love you and JoJo equally? And he says, it doesn't feel like it, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, you can either get frustrated, like, how could you think that?
Right.
But in that moment, he's asking this question: how have you loved me?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to remind him, buddy, I have given you sunglasses, and you haven't lost them, and that's a good job. You've been responsible with them, and so on and so forth. But that's a fundamental question, is what I'm getting at.
It is, and it's one that we have to be reminded of. I think of that psalm, and I forget the number right now, but it's this refrain or this call and response. There's a statement, and this response is, "His steadfast love endures forever."
Yeah.
And that's the entire psalm. I mean, it's one line, and His steadfast love endures forever. And you think, my goodness, that is so boring and repetitive. But it is so vital, because I have a short memory span. Mm-hmm. And I do need that reminder of God's love.
Yeah. And that's what, when I preach Zephaniah, that's what I was trying to get at as well, that God's love is foundational and fundamental to our entire relationship with Him.
Absolutely.
And so if we incur discipline, it's because He loves us.
Right.
That's Book of Hebrews, and I think that's in Jeremiah as well. But.
Right. And it really kind of draws, as Malachi proceeds with this conversation, it comes full circle to the end of it in chapter 3, verse 13 through the first part of chapter 4, because the question there arises is, what good is it to follow God?
Yeah.
Is there really any benefit to this? Because what it looks like sometimes is that the folks who aren't are prospering and are doing really well, while we're struggling even just to get by. And that rises, it comes right back to this question of, does He love me, and is that enough? Is that worth it? And and the answer is yes. This is the Habakkuk answer. At the end, even if there's nothing in the stall, I'm gonna praise God.
Yeah, that's right.
And God's promise in this is, and it's such a beautiful thing at the end, and it's one of the most vibrant issues out of Malachi, is this idea that we will go out, as he says in verse 2 of chapter 4, you shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. And if you've ever seen that, it is a powerful, wonderful picture. Mm-hmm. I'm looking for, and may have available, a calf leaping from the stall, just so to give us that picture.
Yeah.
Because we need to see that it's just this overwhelming joy when it dawns on us, and when we do see it, and when we do experience the depth of God's love and the reality of His justice and the beauty of His provision for us, and how it is in fact worth it. It's all good.
That's so good.
Yeah,
that's so good. So how about we can talk about robbing God for a second?
Okay.
Do you? Let me put you in the hot seat.
Put me in the hot seat right here at the end. All right.
Let me phrase the question this way. It's not a gotcha question. I was going to phrase it as a gotcha question. I'm not going to do that to you. How do we, as New Covenant believers, read this section of Malachi?
I think that we read it as an understanding that that it does matter what we do with the material things of our lives, and the acknowledgement of whose they are. And it's the larger picture of stewardship. It's not that I've got something and I'm going to share it with God. It's that it's all God's, and I'm just acknowledging Him from the beginning. And this is the robbery part, that we would dare to think that it's ours. This goes right back to Genesis 3 in the garden, that we're going to take primary agency rather than relying on God. We're going to take control of our own lives, and maybe add God on later if we want to. The idea that anything that we have is something of our own doing, even if our name may be on a title or whatever, it is gift of God. It is all grace. That's right. And our utilization of it is a stewardship. And this is Jesus' parables about the man going off from the country, and the parables of the talents, and those kinds of things. It wasn't their stuff to do with.
Nope. They were just stewards.
They're stewards, and this is a picture of that. And the giving of a tithe baseline. New Testament it's 100%. Okay, that's the New Testament picture. But here, the giving of a tithe is the acknowledgement of this all belongs to God.
Yep.
And so it's a way for us. It's a good baseline. It's a good starting place. And when we don't give that, we're saying to God, no, you really don't own this. I do.
Yep. Yeah. So Francis Chan wrote a book, Crazy Love.
Right.
Deeply impactful for me as a young Christian. I need to go back and read it now. It'd be interesting to see kind of a change of perspective there. I have no clue where my book is.
I think I know where mine is.
He has a chapter in there called Serving Leftovers to a Holy God.
Yeah.
And he deals with this issue right here. And it floored me as a young Christian. And it's just a picture that he paints of just us feeding God our table scraps.
Right. And this is also connected back to chapter 1 with the priests and the polluted offerings. Mm-hmm. And they were giving less than the best.
Yep.
They were giving leftovers. And God even says, would you give this gift to your governor? He's not God. He's just your governor. Would you give that gift? And the answer is probably, obviously, no. It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
And so often we do that. And listen, let's just be real clear. The money aspect is the easy one. It's what about our time? What kind of leftovers are we giving God there?
Yeah.
What about our other commitments in our life? What other, are there places that we are giving God just leftover time? He is an addendum rather than the center starting point.
Yeah.
That's the critical issue that's here.
I think a lot of people, when we say things like in the New Testament, it's 100%, right?
Right.
I think a lot of people hear that and think, oh wow, now I can give less than 10%.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that thinking is backwards though, right? Because I think when we say, I think that's 100% correct.
Right.
But when I worry that sometimes when people hear that, they think, okay, yeah, it's all grace, and so therefore I can just give whatever I want to at any time that I want to anyone that I want to.
Right.
And so I worry that some people have taken advantage of that. I don't even know if that's the right terminology.
Well, that's exactly what Malachi is addressing here.
Yep.
We're just going to give whatever we want. And God said, no. You need to remember, first of all, who is the source of all those things, and second of all, who you're presenting them to.
Yeah.
And you're not doing either one of those things. And that carries some weight, some consequence. So much so he says, I'd rather you just shut the doors rather than bring those kinds of stinky offerings.
Yeah.
Don't even do it. And if you're going to bring less than the tithe, you just need to understand that's robbery. Yeah. That's like you going to the restaurant and eating and paying half the bill, or walking out on the bill entirely. You have received, but you are not responding. It's serious stuff. This is this conversation that God's having with His people, and so
try that with the IRS.
Yeah, no doubt. Or other folks. Try it with your car payment or your house payment.
Yep.
Or the power bill. They're not. They might work with you a little bit, but there comes a moment where they say, "Here's the line."
Yeah.
And for us to be unfaithful, and what I have discovered, Josh, in my own life, because listen, I was not there early in our lives. We made some poor financial decisions as an early married couple. We carried those burdens for a long time. And there was a moment, I'll never forget it. I was sitting in a recliner chair, and the Lord I was just dealing with it, and the story of Abraham and Isaac, and God's, I don't know that my eardrum vibrated, but it was just as clear as a bell. John, you don't trust me to the point of Abraham's knife. To give that most important thing in my life. Because I was, we were struggling, we were dealing with it, and from that point on, Josh, we began tithing, and God blessed us, and y'all have heard me say from the pulpit many times, I've heard tons of those testimonies where folks stepped up to the line and said, okay, God, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to be obedient to you. And I have heard testimony after testimony after testimony how God came through. I have yet to hear the testimony where someone stepped up in faithful obedience and God failed them. It might be out there. I just haven't heard that testimony.
Yep.
And I think this is part of what God's dealing with His people. Because this is one of these common threads, and we've talked about this through the minor prophets, is we're talking about, 300 or 400 year period here, And it seems like we just kind of hit replay. Return to me. Come back. You're still dealing in injustice. You're still pursuing your own. You're not pursuing me. And here we come to Malachi, the closing argument, and God's entering into this conversation. I have loved you. You're still not fully in tune with where I am. Come back. And here we are, 2,400 years later, still having this conversation because there are people who are questioning, is following God worth it? Can I trust God with the stuff of my life? Is God ever going to do something about evil in this world? I mean, these are real questions. And does God really love me? Well, yeah, he does.
Well, and, dealing with that frustration of, here we go again.
Yeah.
Back from exile, doing the same stuff. In some ways even worse. God gives them the promise. I'm going to show up.
Yes. At
my temple. And there will be a messenger of the covenant. And who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and a fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, and they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord in the days of old, as in the former years. So God's saying, look, I'm going to come, and I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah.
And he does.
He does.
Yep. Jesus comes like a refiner's fire, and he has purified us so that our sacrifices now
can be pleasing
to him.
Right.
And book of Hebrews, book of Romans, consistently talk about us offering up our good and pleasing sacrifices to God.
Right.
Even though we're not slaughtering animals.
No.
Even though Malachi is talking about in chapter 1 literal, real animals that have real blemishes, broken bones, diseases, and stuff like that, it's promised that we will bring sacrifices of praise and living sacrifices of our lives, but it will be unblemished.
Right.
And Jesus does that for us.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
As he works through us.
Exactly.
So how do we do this for 400 years and not get another word from the Lord? How do you sustain faith when there's seems to be no word from the Lord?
Yeah, that's tough. We do it not quite for 400 years, but sometimes we go through times.
Yeah, we feel those dry moments.
I'm leading up in youth. We're gonna take this time to go through some Old Testament saints, because what I really wanted to do Mary and Joseph, Elizabeth and Zechariah, and Simeon and Anna.
Oh, yeah.
For Advent. In
nice.
the youth. That's what I was wanting to do, and then I was like, well, what do we do for the rest of the semester? And I'm just walking through Old Testament saints and how they point us to Jesus. But I really wanted to get to Simeon and Anna. Like, you think about Simeon and Anna.
Yeah.
Sitting in the temple. Anna's a 80-something-year-old widow, been waiting for the consolation of Israel. Simeon knew. He said, now I can depart,
my
for your servant has seen.
Yeah.
And he was waiting day and night. And I think we can do the same now. We know that God's coming.
Right. And one of the other things, and I'll bring this out Sunday when I preach, but it closes with a command to remember the promise of Elijah, and then again the warning to return, or that they'll be utterly destroyed. And that's a kind of a sobering ending to God's word. But I think that command to remember, in Jesus' Last Supper, do this in remembrance. For us, and we'll celebrate the Lord's Supper on Sunday, coincidentally, wonderfully. But it's in that act of remembering, of faithfully remembering, of purposefully, intentionally remembering. Our weekly gatherings on Sunday, so vital, simply because it's another moment for us to remember. And we've got to continue to come together because it primes us for that anticipation. It keeps us on track for that 80 years or 90 years. And that's so hard for us that live in this instantaneous society. I mean, if I want to know the average weight of an African elephant, I can look it up right now. I don't have any idea what it is, but I mean, I can get that information immediately. If I want popcorn, 3 minutes, I've got it, this is just the society in which we live. There's not a lot of value placed on patience, or to use that term that Nietzsche had, was there was one thing that was necessary, and it's a long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
An atheist understands this, but this is what this is all about: is this long obedience and knowing that it's not a hopeless thing. This is the final question that the people is following you, is serving you, worth it? Is it worth? And the answer, of course, is yes. It's not instant. We don't get this, it's not all, beauty and light and all that stuff immediately. But underlying it, undergirding all of this, is this joy that is coming, that is on, and for us to remember and to recount. That's another thing for me, and I'm just making these connections back through the Psalms particularly in the 70s and 80s. The Psalms, a lot of those are just recounting the history of Israel. Mm-hmm. When they defeated Og and Bashan, and I'm thinking, what world does that have to do with me, in 2024? Well, it's remembering what God has done, because what He's done in the past, He's going to act in a similar way for us in the future.
Yep.
We can have that confidence, and we need to remember. That sustains me to keep me going, because there is this final coming day when it's all set aside.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And then we'll run out of the stalls like calves leaping, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, John, we'll do a recap podcast.
Yeah.
So this isn't the last podcast.
Right.
Y'all be on the lookout for a recap of all the 12 minor prophets, or the Book of the 12.
The Book of the 12.
If you want to call them that.
Yeah, and again, thank you for that reminder. That has really been instructive for me throughout this series of looking at this as one extended conversation, and I think Malachi is a fitting end to that.
I think it is as well. So not just chronologically,
Right.
but just literarily.
Yeah.
It connects it all together. So we'll take a look at that in our next podcast. But any final words about Malachi?
No, it's okay to have a conversation with God. In fact, He invites it, and
and
I think that's important for us to grab hold of, to ask those questions and then begin to align our life accordingly.
Yeah, that's good. All right, well, next time we'll do the recap, and we'll see you then.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.